Thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon on Mirror Now. Our top focus clearly where Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman presented the Interim Budget 2024 for 58 minutes in the new Parliament building. Now, key takeaways include the following. There is no change in income tax slabs. Now, the revised fiscal deficit is 5.8% of the GDP. 3 new railway corridors have been announced and 40,000 rail bogies are going to be revamped to Vande Bharat standards. Now, Lakshadweep is slated to get a mega infrastructural boost while the Defence Ministry gets the highest allocation out of all the ministries with an interim budget of 6.2 lakh crore rupees. Now, the Modi government plans to present a detailed roadmap for Viksit Bharat. It's going to be presented in July this year. Remember, this was the last budget presentation of the Modi government before the Lok Sabha elections. All right, to better understand their perspective, do they give it a thumbs up or not? I'm being joined in by my guest this afternoon, Madhavan Narayan, senior journalist, and Rajani Sinha, chief economist, CA Ratings. Thank you very much, both of you, for taking the time out and joining us here on Mirror Now. I'm quickly going to come to you as far as what you thought about that. But first, let's play the key bites that Nirmala Sitharaman did speak about the budget.
Over the last 10 years, the direct tax collections have more than trebled and the return filers swelled 2.4 times. I would like to assure the taxpayers that their contributions have been used wisely for the development of the country and welfare of its people. I appreciate the taxpayers for their continued support. The government has reduced and rationalized tax rates. Under the new tax scheme, there is now no tax liability for taxpayers with income up to 7 lakh rupees, up from 2.2 lakh rupees in the financial year 2013-14. The threshold for presumptive taxation for retail businesses was increased from 2 crores to 3 crores. Similarly, the threshold for professionals eligible for presumptive taxation was increased from 50 lakh rupees to 75 lakh rupees. Also, corporate tax rate was decreased from 30% to 22% for existing domestic companies and to 15% for certain new manufacturing companies. Honourable Speaker, sir, in the last 5 years, our focus has been to improve taxpayer services. The age-old jurisdiction-based assessment system was transformed with the introduction of faceless assessment and appeal, thereby imparting greater efficiency, transparency and accountability. Introduction of updated income tax returns, a new Form 26AS and pre-filling of tax returns have made filing of tax returns simpler and easier. As for tax proposals, in keeping with the convention, I do not propose to make any changes relating to taxation and propose to retain the same tax rates for direct and indirect taxes, including import duties. Exemplary track record of governance, development and performance. Besides delivering on high growth in terms of gross domestic product, the government is equally focused on a more comprehensive GDP, that is, governance, development and performance.
All right, Rajani, let me come to you first. As far as no relief for taxpayers, what did you really make of the budget?
So, as this was an interim budget, we were not expecting any major policy announcement. But I would say the FM has still, even in the interim budget, managed to tick the right boxes. And a few things that I would like to highlight is, one, that the government has continued to move towards fiscal discipline. And this was very important because the economy has been recording very robust growth. So this was the time to kind of, move further towards fiscal discipline, and what the government has budgeted for in terms of fiscal deficit is much lower than what the market was expecting. So that's one big positive I will highlight. The second big positive I'll highlight is that they have managed to reduce the fiscal deficit or budget a lower fiscal deficit even while maintaining their focus on capex. So if we see for the last few years, the government has been focusing on capex to revive India's economic growth. And government's capex to GDP ratio has shot up to around 3.4% or so from less than 2% that we had in the pre-COVID period. And it's the positive thing is that even in this year's budget, the focus on capex has been continued. The 11.1 lakh crore capex number that has been budgeted for takes the capex to GDP, keeps the capex to GDP ratio at 3.4%, which around the same as what was there for last year. So that's the second big positive I would say. And thirdly, beyond that, beyond fiscal rectitude and focus on capex, the budget has also taken care of other aspects like, empowerment of women, focus on youth, tourism, green economic growth. So those things have also been taken care of. So broadly, these are the aspects that I would like to highlight.
All right, okay, Rajani, essentially as you share with us your perspective as to what you really made of it, let me go across to Madhavan. Madhavan, rightly put by Rajani that of course there were not too many expectations, but with the fact that one of the talking points has been no relief for taxpayers, but in your opinion, what do you make of the budget?
Hi Nivedna. Let me first pick up from where I left off with your colleague Shreya, which is that, I called it essentially an election year speech packaged as a short budget speech. And, she talked about Mahila, Annadata, Garib and Yuva, which basically I made that as a Maggi budget as, not to be confused with the noodles. But if you really look at the numbers and what the economist Rajani Sinha has been talking about, essentially the beneficiaries are not the MAGY but the MIFTs, which is manufacturers, infrastructure builders, financiers and transporters. So essentially if you look at the MIFT character of this budget, you will find that it is essentially about muscular economic growth, which is top heavy in terms of government spending. Of course, they are trying to consolidate fiscal deficit so that they can continue.
आज का ये बजट तो है ही, लेकिन ये बजट इंक्लूसिव और इनोवेटिव बजट है। इस बजट में कंटिन्यूटी का कॉन्फिडेंस है। ये बजट विकसित भारत के 4 स्तंभ युवा, गरीब, महिला और किसान सभी को एम्पावर करेगा। निर्मला जी का ये बजट देश के भविष्य के निर्माण का बजट है। इस बजट में 2047 के विकसित भारत की नींव को मजबूत करने की गारंटी है। मैं निर्मला जी और उनकी टीम को बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं। साथियों, इस बजट में युवा भारत की युवा आकांक्षाओं का, भारत की यंग एस्पिरेशंस का प्रतिबिंब है। बजट में 2 महत्वपूर्ण निर्णय ले गए हैं। रिसर्च और इनोवेशन पर 1 लाख करोड़ रुपए का फंड बनाने की घोषणा की गई है। बजट में स्टार्टअप को मिलने वाली टैक्स छूट के विस्तार का भी ऐलान किया गया है। साथियों, इस बजट में फिस्कल डेफिसिट को नियंत्रण में रखते हुए कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर को 11,11,111 करोड़ रुपए की ऐतिहासिक ऊंचाई दी गई है। अर्थशास्त्रियों की भाषा में कहें तो एक प्रकार से स्वीट स्पॉट है। इससे भारत में 21वीं सदी के आधुनिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के निर्माण के साथ ही युवाओं के लिए अनगिनत रोजगार के नए अवसर तैयार होंगे। बजट में वंदे भारत स्टैंडर्ड की 40,000 आधुनिक बोगियां बनाकर उन्हें सामान्य यात्री ट्रेनों में लगाने का ऐलान किया गया है। इससे देश के अलग अलग रेल रूट पर करोड़ों यात्रियों में आरामदायक यात्रा का अनुभव बढ़ेगा। साथियों, हम एक बड़ा लक्ष्य तय करते हैं, उसे प्राप्त करते हैं और फिर उससे भी बड़ा लक्ष्य अपने लिए तय करते हैं। गरीबों के लिए हमने गांवों और शहरों में 4 करोड़ से अधिक घर बनाए। अब हमने 2 करोड़ और नए घर बनाने का लक्ष्य रखा है। हमने 2 करोड़ महिलाओं को लखपति दीदी बनाने का लक्ष्य रखा था। अब इस लक्ष्य को बढ़ाकर 3 करोड़ लखपति दीदी बनाने का कर दिया गया है। आयुष्मान भारत योजना ने गरीबों की बहुत मदद की है। अब आंगनवाड़ी और आशा वर्कर, उन सबको इस योजना का लाभ मिलेगा। साथियों, इस बजट में गरीब और मध्यम वर्ग को एम्पावर कर दे, उनके लिए आय के नए अवसर बनाने पर भी बहुत जोर दिया गया है। रूफटॉप सोलर अभियान में 1 करोड़ परिवारों को सोलर रूफटॉप के माध्यम से मुफ्त बिजली प्राप्त होगी। इतना ही नहीं, सरकार को अतिरिक्त बिजली बेचकर लोगों को 15 से 20 हजार प्रतिवर्ष की आय भी होगी और ये हर परिवार को होगी। साथियों, आज जिस इनकम टैक्स रेविशन स्कीम की घोषणा की गई है, उससे मध्यम वर्ग के करीब 1 करोड़ लोगों को बड़ा राहत मिलेगी। पिछली सरकारों ने सामान्य मानवी के सिर पर दशकों से ये बहुत बड़ी तलवार लटका कर रखी थी। आज इस बजट में किसानों के लिए भी बहुत महत्वपूर्ण और बड़े निर्णय लिए गए हैं। नैनो डीएपी का उपयोग हो, पशुओं के लिए नई योजना हो, पीएम मत्स्य संपदा योजना का विस्तार हो और आत्मनिर्भर ऑयल सीड अभियान हो। इससे किसानों की आय बढ़ेगी और खर्च कम होगा। मैं एक बार फिर सभी देशवासियों को इस ऐतिहासिक बजट के लिए शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
All right, that is of course Prime Minister Modi talking about the budget. He's gone on to call it an inclusive and innovative budget. But my guests of course continue to stay with me. Let me come back to you, Madhavan. Unfortunately, that's how it works as far as television news is also concerned, and all of us know that. But with the fact that Prime Minister Modi of course has called it an inclusive and innovative budget, but you were of the opinion that is something that you're not on lines with. That's not how you essentially look at it?
Yeah, I think let's look at it with a sense of detail. I think we have to look at it not just in terms of what is being said, but it is also in terms of what is being spent and the larger context in which what is being spent, so that we get a clear big picture analysis of it. So let me throw some numbers at you to compare with the numbers that the government talked about. I mentioned to you that the government officially talked about Mahila, Annadata, Garib and Yuva, which is Maggie budget, but the actual spending priorities have been loaded in favor of manufacturers, infrastructure builders, financiers, and transporters. So therefore, I would call it the MIFT budget with an MAGY claim. Now, what does this mean? In the larger context, let's look at agriculture. The government has not been able to fulfill its promise of doubling farmers' incomes, and the farm bills were withdrawn because they were controversial. The current budget is talking about infrastructure facilities for farmers, but essentially farmers get support from support prices on which there has not been sufficient movement to correct imbalances. Let me throw a number at you. About 150 million families, they say, or about 60% of India's population depends on agriculture, which contributes only 18% to the GDP right now, which basically means there's a gross inequality between agricultural and non-agricultural incomes, while the population is skewed heavily in favor of the agricultural sector. So unless there is a transfer of income or an absorption of employment in other sectors which are showing growth, there is still some miles to go and there is a walking of the wedge. Now, electorally speaking, farmers are not as powerful as they used to be in political terms, because the government, this government, especially with its Labharti schemes towards welfare of what I call a non-agricultural rural population, like the artisans, and also in terms of some of the welfare benefits like electricity and insurance and water, seems to be politically managing everything very well. But essentially that still talks of inequality which is widespread in the economy, which might speak a political language at some point in time. So that is one thing. The other thing I mentioned earlier in the to Mirror Now as well, which is that there's a lot of emphasis on loans, whether it is infrastructure loans, whether it is Mudra loans. Mudra loans, 43 crore loans are there. As I said, if these loans work well, there shouldn't be an unemployment problem. But we'll have to wait till the loans actually fructify into productive ventures, and we need a proper audit of some of the welfare schemes as well as the loan schemes, because any economy which is heavily leveraged with the loan buyers essentially has to wait. You know, it's just like you and me. If you take a loan, you have to worry about the EMI, and we have to worry about the incomes in order to pay the EMI. So there's a certain fine wedge there. Right now, the economy is looking good because the inflation is low, as well as interest rates are being able to manage. But if you see what happened to Paytm yesterday, audit shows that personal loans are not going the way they should. The Reserve Bank recently also cracked down a bit on non-banking financial companies in order to be prudent. So any loan-oriented economy also has to keep an eye on the, some of the rear view mirror issues of driving forward in growth in terms of loans being viable. We don't want to end up with the NPA problem that we saw a decade ago. You know, Raghuram Rajan has once cautioned about Mudra loans. I thought he was being pessimistic, and he was being pessimistic, but the government may be being too optimistic on this. What we need to do is to walk the wedge between extreme optimism and extreme pessimism. And right now, everything is going well for the government, especially on the political side, especially with things like Ram Mandir, so that it can actually sidestep some of the inequality-related issues on the economy. Now, but no honeymoon lasts forever, so I would be watching this space, especially. And last but not the least, I think there will be another budget in July anyway, so we'll have to watch for it.
All right, absolutely. And of course, you've helped us better understand what you make of those numbers. But Rajani, as far as we talk about the sectors as well, we play the graphics of the same on our screens. In terms of the fact that Ministry of Road Transport and Highways has got 2.78% allocation for specific ministries, what did you really make of that? Because the highest, of course, is gone to Ministry of Defence. Rajani, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. So the government is clearly focused on infrastructure development. And even in infrastructure, we have seen that the focus has been on roads and railways. And I would say that that's a positive trend, because that will result in the overall logistics cost going down. Because if you see for Indian economy and if we see for our manufacturing sector, one big bane is the high logistic cost that we have compared to our global peers. So if we are talking about, if you're looking at competing with global economies, it's very important that we reduce our logistics cost. So all this investment in infrastructure, specifically transport infrastructure, should enable us to reduce our logistic costs. So I would look at it in a positive sense.
All right. Having said that, let's also listen into the reaction of the finance minister as far as these sectors are concerned.
Railways. 3 major economic railway corridor programs will be implemented. These are energy, mineral and cement corridor. Number 2, port connectivity corridors. And number 3, high traffic density corridors. The projects have been identified under the PM Gati Shakti for enabling multimodal connectivity. They will improve logistics efficiency and reduce cost. The resultant decongestion of the high traffic corridors will also help in improving operations of passenger trains, resulting in safety and higher travel speed for passengers. Together with dedicated freight corridors, these 3 economic corridor programs will accelerate our GDP growth and reduce logistic costs. The aviation sector has been galvanized in the past 10 years. Number of airports have doubled to 149. Rollout of air connectivity to Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities under UDAN scheme has been widespread. 517 new routes are carrying 1.3 crore passengers. Indian carriers have proactively placed orders for over 1,000 new aircrafts.
All right. The other aspect, Madhavan, talking about housing sector as well. What did you make about that?
I think it's a good point, the Prime Minister. Like I said, there is a very interesting way of looking at this government's approach to the economy. The Labharti schemes, as the Prime Minister himself calls it, has a lot of welfare aspects that include Ayushman Bharat, the PM Awas Yojana, which is the housing scheme. All these are good, but most of them involve what I call participative development, in which somebody has to put money up front in order to get the benefits that the government is offering. So, for this to happen, the incomes have to be sustainable. So, there is an umbilical link between overall GDP growth and the ability to leverage the benefits of the schemes. Because it's not as if the government is giving you ready-made homes to live in without for you to do anything. It basically means it gives you some subsidy.
Right, Madhavan, although you're sharing with us that perspective, I'm afraid I'd have to cut you short there because we're running out of time. But I want to thank you and Rajani for taking the time out and joining us here this afternoon. But before I leave, let's listen to all those political reactions.
भारत की इकॉनमी की साइज जितनी इस समय है